Hello again, everyone from Ottawa, and welcome back to day 3 of the Recovery Summit. I'm Alex Patterson, Executive Director of Canada 2020 and co-founder of the Recovery Project. Before we begin, I want to thank you all for tuning in throughout the week. It's been an inspiring, sobering, and insightful program so far, full of bold ideas for the kind of world we can build out of this pandemic. Today, we will be focusing on our final 2 themes, sustainability and democracy in institutions. And there's a common thread of the urgent need for resilience running through both of today's conversations. I have the privilege of introducing our panel on sustainability, though our ability to enact a bold green recovery effort will also depend on the strength and vibrancy of our democracies and our institutions. When I opened the Recovery Summit 2 days ago, I said that we are hosting these conversations now because our policymakers are returning to a pivotal moment in our legislative cycles. While we are still in the midst of this pandemic, the pillars of recovery are beginning to take shape. And the challenge for elected officials is to ensure that building back better means building a more resilient, sustainable future. Few people understand this better than our summit co-chair for today's session, Mr. Frans Timmermans, the Executive Vice President of the European Commission. He will be joining us in a few minutes. But as with our other themes so far, we begin with a series of big idea pitches that have been sent in from an impressive lineup of sustainability thinkers around the world. First, Martin Moore, who is a senior lecturer in political communication, education, and director of the Center for the Study of Media, Communication, and Power at King's College in London. Next, Alex Lasky, who is founder and executive chair of Rewiring America. And finally, Veronica Scotti, who is a member of the Task Force for Resilient Recovery and chairperson for public sector solutions at Swiss Re. Let's start with Martin.
The clock is ticking on the climate emergency. We have less than a decade to make radical changes to the ways we all live. Disillusioned with democracy and mainstream politics, young people have taken the charge to address the climate catastrophe. As consumers, they demand more sustainable and ethical products and practices from corporations. As citizens, they make understanding climate crisis a priority, and they're organizing themselves and others to vote for change. Governments are losing out on the opportunity to harness this energy for social good and to address our most pressing social, economic, and global problems.
We urgently need to support, channel, and coordinate young people's efforts and desires towards making the planet sustainable, averting climate disaster, and recovering from the coronavirus. The Youth Environment Service, or YES, can do just this. Modelled on national service schemes, YES would give every young person the opportunity to do 1 year of environmental service, with the aim of making the world more resilient to climate change, floods, fires, and pandemics, and making our environment and way of life more sustainable. But YES can also do much more than this. It can bring atomized and disparate young people together to work towards a common purpose. It can develop the knowledge, skills, and leadership needed to cope with future global shocks. And it can ensure that the young people whose lives have been turned upside down by COVID-19 do not become a lost generation. A program like YES could focus youth frustration and anger towards positive, constructive, and noble ends, helping to foster social solidarity and demonstrating that connected, democratic communities are capable of addressing the world's biggest challenge together.
Hi, my name is Alex Lasky, and I'm the co-founder of Rewiring America, a nonprofit coalition of engineers and entrepreneurs focused on rapidly decarbonizing, re-energizing, and rewiring the economy. I was also president and founder of OPower, a publicly traded software company that works with utilities all over the world to help people save energy in their homes. Today, OPower, now a division of Oracle, generates roughly 6 terawatt hours of energy savings, or $1 billion of bill savings every year for ordinary homeowners all around the world. I've spent most of my career at this point working to halt the threat of climate change. And today that threat, which a decade ago felt abstract and future tense, feels very real and present. With record temperatures and wildfires on the west coast of my country, torrential, deadly rainfall in Africa, and other unprecedented weather patterns seemingly happening everywhere. Yet today, after the better part of 2 decades working on this issue, I have never been more optimistic about our ability to win. Why? Well, too often we've heard that addressing climate change in order to stay below a 1.5 or 2 degree future, in other words, to live on a livable Earth, would require some kind of technological miracle. And that even with a miracle, addressing climate change will cost too much and take what is now an already depressed economy and destroy it. At Rewiring America, which I've co-founded with my friend and MacArthur Genius Award-winning engineer and physicist, Saul Griffith, we have taken a look at the data on energy systems, particularly in the US, and found that if we still have a pathway to meet climate goals, using existing technology, if we start now. Moreover, if done comprehensively and quickly, and with the right policy levers in place, we can transform our energy systems while saving people money. According to our analysis, which is being published in a forthcoming MIT Press peer-reviewed book, the right sets of policy can ensure that the average US household doesn't spend more money as we transition off fossil fuels, but on the contrary, the average family will save roughly $2,000 a year. In Europe and Canada, the savings are roughly equivalent. How is it that we're all going to save money? Well, it turns out that most of the energy in our economies today is wasted. And I don't mean the waste that comes from leaving the lights on when no one's in the room or the heat on when nobody is home. No. I mean that much of the energy that flows through our economies is spent trying to find, mine, refine, and transport fossil fuels. For instance, did you know that 4% of all the energy in the US economy is oil being used to transform oil into gasoline? And a big chunk more energy is wasted as heat as we try and convert these same fossil fuels into either electricity or to propel our vehicles. Roughly speaking, 5 to 10% of the latent energy in our gasoline propels our car forward. Most of this energy is wasted as heat. When you take all of this waste into consideration, a fully decarbonized and electrified economy requires less than half of the energy we use today. And you don't need to move to a smaller home or drive a duller car. In fact, for many of us, very little will change as we make this transition. Instead of fossil fuel burning cars, we will have electric cars. Our homes will be heated with heat pumps. Our appliances will be all electric. Our cars will be zippier, our air will be cleaner, and we will all be healthier. When we are hooked up to an omnidimensional grid, something we think of as similar to the internet, we will be able to share packets of electricity, much like today we share packets of information. We call this grid neutrality. Still, in order to transition away from fossil fuels, we will need about 3 times the electricity we generate now. That will mean a different landscape, one where our roofs, our parking lots, our agricultural fields do double duty, providing solar and wind energy. Making this transition will not cripple our economies. To the contrary, our analysis demonstrates, and common sense dictates, that this transformation of our shared infrastructure and the infrastructure in each of our homes will not just save ordinary people money, but it will put tens of millions of people back to work. Installing solar panels on your roof, a heat pump in your basement, these are jobs that cannot be done by someone in a far-off city or across an ocean. And they can't be done by a robot either. They are necessarily local, community jobs done by skilled and unskilled laborers. And if we get the policy right, we can and must pay people a living wage to do this work. We published a report this summer which details and categorizes the 25 million net new jobs in the US alone that we will create as we make this transition. At Rewiring America, we are well aware that we are behind many other countries in addressing climate change. Japan and Germany have figured out heat pumps. Australia has incredibly low-cost solar. Many other countries are far ahead of us in that they have the political will to address climate change head-on. Our job at Rewiring America is to provide the data and analysis to show that electrifying everything is not only good for the environment, but it will help the US and the world recover from the economic devastation we are all experiencing. Together we can and must create a more robust, resilient, and rewarding global economy. Come visit us at rewiringamerica.org, and thank you all for everything you're doing to build a more resilient and rewarding future.
There is no greater challenge today for governments than facing the consequences, both sanitary and economic, of the COVID pandemic. So first of all, I want to send my heartfelt thanks to all of you for the work that you're doing to protect Canadian families and friends. But this is a recovery summit, so what kind of recovery do we want? At Swiss Re, we are convinced that if there is one good to be taken out of the situation we're in, is the unique opportunity we have today to make choices about our future. And it is with absolute conviction that we want a more resilient, a more sustainable, and a low-carbon future. So I would like to share with you some ideas that fit under this vision. But first, why should you even care about what I have to say? Swiss Re is a 150-year-old company with tremendous experience in dealing with all sorts of disaster scenarios and situations. We partner with clients from the public sector to insurance companies and corporates around the world to help them make decisions when extreme risks scenarios are facing them. And we are also a very long-term investor. So when we look at our own business, we know that the next 30 years will be absolutely pivotal to our ability to thrive or not. And we've made a deep, deep commitment to actually transform our entire business model so that we can embed resilience and sustainability in everything we do. And to underpin that commitment, we've publicly pledged to transform everything that we do, from our operations to our investments and our insurance activities, by 2050. It is in that spirit that we co-founded with others the Asset Owners Alliance, which today comprises over 8 trillion of invested assets. And the commitment that we've all subscribed to in that space is not only to decarbonize and reduce the carbon intensity of our investment portfolio, but actually help transform and transition the business of our investee companies. From an insurance business perspective, we've been looking at various forms of solutions so that sustainability can be embedded, and we are signee to the principle of sustainable insurance. One exciting initiative under that framework is nature-based solutions. And I want to share with you a couple of examples of what we're doing and what we're working on next. In 2017, Swiss Re created and designed the first ever coral reef protection for the Mesoamerican reef in Quintana Roo. That cover does a couple of things. It recognizes, firstly, the value of the coral reef as a natural asset that prevents land erosion and protects against sea surge. Secondly, it also created a secondary benefit for the local communities. We created the role of the reef rangers, and these are people that, as a job, go around, collect the reef, restore it, so not only it can continue to protect the land, but it can continue also to be beautiful and attract the tourists that are so important for the local activities. Furthermore, we continue to work with academias and collaborate with all clients and partners around the world to develop systems that allow us to more directly link the value and the interdependency of economic activities from natural assets. So what are the opportunities in Canada? As you likely know, 1/4 of the global wetlands are actually in your beautiful country, and they are an incredible ecosystem for diversity, but also to protect against the risk of floods and super powerful in absorbing and capturing carbon. Secondly, I learned recently from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and the Insurance Bureau of Canada that there is an expected 5.3 billion of investment required in infrastructures to be able to face off the physical risks of climate change in your country each and every year. Wouldn't that be wonderful to look together for solutions to not only protect the wetlands, but also give them more value and contextually invest in infrastructure that are much needed by the local communities, whilst making their cities even more beautiful than they are today. I leave you with these thoughts, and I hope you will debate them intensely. And as a final remark, I do hope you will reach out to discuss ways to collaborating between the public sector, the corporate world, and the financial sector, of which Swiss Re is an important player, to gift our Canadian municipalities and citizens not only a wealthy, but also a very healthy future. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much to each of our idea pitchers for sending in those bold and thought-provoking ideas. As with all of our other videos presented this week at the Recovery Summit, you will be able to watch them on Canada 2020's YouTube channel, as well as at www.recoveryproject.org. Before we begin our panel discussion, I want to do a few quick words of reminders and thanks. First, reminding you to share this session on your social channels. We're active on Twitter and Instagram using the hashtag Recovery Summit. And second, if you would like to put a question to our panelists today, you can do that in two ways. First, in the YouTube chat, and second, at Slido. Go to slido.com and enter the tag Recovery Summit to share your thoughts and comments with our panelists. Our team is standing by. Next, I want to say a word of thanks again to our partners who have helped make this summit a success so far. Groups like the Berggruen Institute, the Daedalus Center for Global Health Research at York University, MasterCard Canada, the Business Council of Canada, IMC, and Google, and the team at YouTube who are helping us with our stream. I also want to thank Global Progress, the Institute for Fiscal Studies and Democracy, and my team at Canada 2020. Now, on to our panel discussion for today. As mentioned, our chair for today's theme is Mr. Frans Timmermans, who began his career with the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1987 and has since served as the Netherlands Minister of Foreign Affairs, as well as first Vice President of the European Commission. His current role as Executive Vice President of the European Commission sees him responsible for the Green Deal and makes him the perfect chair for today's conversation. Mr. Timmermans is going to be joined by a fantastic panel, including, first and foremost, my hometown Member of Parliament and Canadian Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, the Honourable Catherine McKenna. Next is Gergely Karacsony, the Mayor of Budapest. And finally, John Podesta, the founder and director of the Center for American Progress. Our moderator is the fantastic Megan Leslie, former MP and president and CEO of the World Wildlife Fund in Canada. And Mr. Timmermans is the chair of today's theme, but first I want to throw things over to our moderator, Megan, for a few introductory remarks. Hi, Megan, how are you?
Hi, I'm pretty excited. I have to say, when Canada 2020 and everybody who's organizing this conference asked me if I would moderate, I couldn't believe my luck when I saw the panelists. As you know, my background is environment, and I also have a background in social rights and economic rights. So I'm pretty passionate about this idea that we could have a recovery that is both green and just, an economic recovery that is also green. And if we're looking for ideas on how to do that, we have to look at the past to see what's worked and what hasn't. We have to think about the future and what's on deck and what's in store, what's next and innovative. And I think that these panelists have those experiences in spades. So it's an exciting group of people. I'm looking forward to asking them questions so that we can learn here in Canada. I mean, we're all dealing with this recovery, so we've got to figure out what are the best ideas out there and how do we make them happen.
And Megan, as you know, as a former member of Parliament and in your current role, the themes that we're talking about in today's session and across the summit, they're intersectional. They talk to one another. So you can't have a resilient, sustainable recovery effort without the strong democracies and institutions to support it. You can't have more inclusive societies without shared prosperity. So I'm curious about how you approach these sort of three-dimensional intersectional ideas and concepts that talk to one another.
You know what? I think, that phrase, everything I needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten or something like that. If we go back to basics of who we are as humans, we can understand complex ideas. I think as we get older, we force ourselves into these silos. It's like, okay, now we're going to talk about environment. Now we'll talk about economy. Now we'll talk about democracy. They are all linked. So let's get back to our kindergarten selves of understanding the world in a more holistic way. And we're all kind of related. These things are interrelated kind of way. In particular, I think Mr. Timmermans will have some good perspectives to share on this, because I think maybe in Canada, we get a little more siloed on these things. I think there's a lot we can learn from Europe and the way that they're seeing this interconnectivity among these different institutions and these different ideas. So I'm eager to hear his opening address, and to actually, I may have a question posed to him on this exact topic.
And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask what work the World Wildlife Fund is going to be focused on, not only now, but projected into the future with relation to recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. What opportunities does your organization see?
Thank you for asking me this. We're a nature organization, we're a conservation organization. So you might think, well, there's not really a role for nature in the recovery. There is. Nature is actually a good solution to a lot of things. We have a biodiversity crisis right now. Nature can help solve that. We have a climate crisis right now. Nature can help solve that. A lot of what we're talking about with restoration and regeneration of nature, these are jobs that don't take a lot of heavy training. We can do them while they're socially distanced. We can, and Indigenous communities are leading the way on conservation. There's so much to learn there. So nature, I think, has a ton of potential to get off the ground quickly, to get us going, and to tackle all of these threats at the same time. And I am looking forward to chatting about this with Minister McKenna. You're stealing all of my questions here, Alex.
I think that means birds of a feather.
Yes.
It's great minds think alike. That's great. So what I want to do now is I want to do just a quick check, because I believe we have Mr. Timmermans with us. As I mentioned, Mr. Timmermans is one of our fantastic 5 co-chairs that we have for the Recovery Summit. Mr. Timmermans, I believe we have you here today. Hello.
Yes, I am here. Just come virtually from Berlin. So,
Well, thank you very much for making the trip. As I was just talking about with Megan Leslie, our moderator for today's session, we thought that we might hand first word to yourself as co-chair of the sustainability theme here for the Recovery Summit, and then we'll get into our panel discussion. So, Mr. Timmermans, I'll hand the floor over to yourself.
Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing me to say a few things. This for us at the European Commission is an important day, because the President of the Commission delivered her State of the Union speech, which just gives some indication of what our plans are for the next year. We've just announced that we will increase our ambition in terms of our emissions reduction for 2030 to minus 55%, and we will follow that up with a lot of measures for all the sectors affected. I do believe that the pandemic has shown how vulnerable we are and how urgent the measures are to get us to climate neutrality, which we hope to reach in Europe by 2050. And I was, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, the first 1 or 2 months, you got these reactions, people saying climate policy, environmental policy is a luxury. We're struggling to survive here. We're worried about our health, our jobs. Don't bother us with this luxury good, which is called the climate crisis. But much to my pleasant surprise, public opinion hasn't shifted in that way. Yes, the pandemic is at the top of people's worries. Yes, they worry about their health and their jobs, but they haven't forgotten about the other threats to humanity, the biodiversity crisis and especially the climate crisis. So we have a huge opportunity to show through international cooperation, to show through politics that we can actually do something about this. I think to kickstart our discussions today, let me recall that the 6 priority actions for a sustainable recovery which were outlined, I think, a fortnight ago by Antonio Guterres. First, investing in green jobs, not bailing out polluting industries, ending fossil fuel subsidies, accounting for climate risk in all financial and policy decisions, working together, and I think most importantly, and this is in all the impact assessments we do in this area, we get this as the number one worry, the worry that this is going to exacerbate differences within society. So it is only going to help to work if we leave no one behind, and that this is not just a slogan, but this is translated very concretely in social policies. If we don't succeed in doing that, then we can forget about reaching climate neutrality by 2050, because people will oppose it because they feel they lose out and they don't have a part in this. So we will integrate this in Europe very concretely in all our policies. We have announced that 30% of our budget, EU budget, will be spent on climate-related projects, and that 100% of the budget should be branded "Do No Harm." So we have to make sure that nothing we do takes us away from accomplishing the Paris Agreement, and at least 30% of what we do is direct investment in climate policy. Now, we can lead on this as Europeans, but if we then lead and look back and nobody's following, there's no point. There's no point. So we need to convince the rest of the world to tag along. One of the slightly encouraging things is that on the many issues where we disagree with China and have some pretty hard confrontations, we had it at our summit last Monday. On this issue, China seems to be moving in the right direction. And let me salute the Canadian minister, because Canada has done tremendous work in leading this and giving us also hope that we're not alone in this. Some very encouraging developments in a number of Asian countries, Latin American countries. I'm really excited about what is happening in Africa today. Many things are hugely challenging, but the mindset has changed in many political circles in Africa on the sustainability issue, and we should jump into that, certainly as Europeans. I think that we need to establish, of course, let me address the elephant in the room. So much depends on the elections on the 3rd of November in the United States, for the world as a whole, not just for the United States. But whatever happens, let us, those who believe in international cooperation, those who believe in multilateralism, let us try and set up systems that will allow others to join if they can. If at the federal level they can't, at least states and cities and NGOs and companies could join. But let me stress in conclusion that resilience and inclusiveness are essential elements of the approach we will be choosing in the EU. Because also, COVID, the virus doesn't discriminate, but the effects of the virus are extremely discriminatory on parts of the population, and it has exacerbated the problem we already have with the climate crisis. So if there's ever any time, I mean, this is probably in my lifetime, I'm 59 years old, it's probably in my lifetime, the moment where redistribution as the prime instrument of governance and politics becomes more important than ever before. And I believe we need to look that into the eye, because if we don't acknowledge that this is an age of redistribution and that we need to do it in a fair way, then we will lose everything else we're trying to do. Thank you very much.
Mr. Timmermans, thank you for that. Hi, I'm Megan Leslie, our moderator today, and it's nice to virtually meet you. Man, you look good for somebody who just came from Berlin. Wow. Thanks for those opening words. And I do want to jump in here. When we think about who is watching today, who's tuning in, we're probably all on the same page as when we talk about these theories. Is it possible to have a just green recovery? We're probably all saying, yeah, we think so. So I really want to take this opportunity to learn from each of you and get some of those good ideas about how this can play out in Canada. What are some pitfalls we need to avoid? What are some best practices that have worked, or some innovative ideas? So I'll pose this question to you first, but I'd love to hear from all the panelists about this. You talked about some public analysis or polling about how people have not given up on these other threats. They want to see recovery and tackling these other threats. Well, on the first day of the first panel on Monday here of the summit, we did have some polling data done by More in Common and explored that a bit. And More in Common found that here, people do believe that governments should do more to address climate change, but at the same time, they're maybe prioritizing that economic recovery from the pandemic over a solid environmental plan. Two issues still prominent, but can we prioritize? I think here in Canada, some of us think that this idea of progress towards economic security and environment is this new concept, when in fact, grassroots movements have been working on it for decades. You've been working on it for decades. So your work with the European Green Deal that says we can do this by turning climate and environmental challenges into opportunities and make the transition for a just and inclusive future. What have been some of your experiences of working through those tensions?
Well, before the pandemic, the economy was doing quite well. So when we came with our ideas on the Green Deal as a growth strategy, many were saying, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's be part of this. But many were also saying, yeah, it's a good idea, but let's see whether it works, and then we'll wait a couple of years, etc. Now, the pandemic has changed all that because now, we took deep dives into all the industrial sectors in Europe, and almost all of them now are facing quite radical restructuring. And we have mobilized more money to invest than ever before, and it's probably a one-off. It's not something we can do again in next year or so. Nobody can avoid making a choice right now. And the biggest threat to where we are now is that public authorities, under pressure of the immediate, would repeat the mistakes of the 2008 crisis, which is throwing money at anything just to keep it afloat. And that's why our plan and our Green Deal and our asking of member states to give us their restructuring recovery plans is so important, that we stick to the principle that the money we invest should be invested in sustainable industries. And I mean sustainable in the most broadest definition possible. And to do that, we need to coordinate that. We need to check that. I'm a politician. I know how it works. The risks are huge. That in panic, people are starting to throw money at anything. Yeah. But we have an opportunity now on the basis of the Green Deal, combined with the need to digitize our society and our economy, and the need to increase our resilience, which is a big ask of many people. We restructure in a way that is sustainable. That is actually the core element of our Green Deal.
And what are you finding in Europe for people who, on the ground, Monsieur et Madame tout le monde? Are they saying, yeah, actually, we see the need to have this plan and stick to it? Or is that panic settling in from time to time, saying, no, just throw money at it. We just got to do this?
Well, it of course depends where you are. If you're, let me give you a very concrete example. If you work in the steel industry, or you work in the car industry, and you see these huge changes coming, and you're an expert at building carburetors, and the car industry is going to build electric cars with no carburetors, where am I going to go? And then if the one big problem we have in all Western societies since a decade after the previous crisis, our middle classes don't believe in progress anymore. So their attitude is any form of change is loss for me. So I resist any form of change. So we are under an obligation to demonstrate that this is a change that is inevitable, not because otherwise we'll die. That's not my point. It's inevitable because change is happening anyway, and let's try and shape it. And that's why one of our flagship initiatives we're taking now is what we call the renovation wave. So we will invest massively in renovating houses and offices. It immediately leads to lower emissions. It immediately leads to economic activity, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises. And it leads to the feeling of citizens, hey, they're doing something that works for me, because my energy bill will not go up, it might go down, and my house will be better, more livable, and have a higher value. So these things are, we need to find a combination between immediate results and long-term goals. And that is, I think, for policymakers, the biggest challenge today.
Isn't it? Isn't it? Mr. Podesta, I'd like to welcome you to this panel, and it's wonderful to have you joining us. I'm sure some of what Mr. Timmermans was saying resonates with you.
Oh, and totally, Megan.
Yeah. Is that elephant in the room with you? I mean, our neighbors to the south. Some of the incredible tensions that exist here between environment and economy. We're here north of the border. We're looking at what's happening in the U.S. and it's like practically splashed on billboards. It might actually be splashed on billboards. What are some lessons that we can learn from your experience with, whether it's from the Center for American Progress or you even as a human being, you're taking action as well. What are some lessons that you think we should learn from?
Well, look, right now we're all focusing on politics. And as my friend Franz Timmermans said, November 3rd is going to be solve the question of what direction we're going in. And I think in the United States, more perhaps than any other country in the world, including Australia and most of Europe, the contrast between the approaches of Donald Trump and Vice President Biden couldn't be more stark on this question. They could not be further apart. As our country is experiencing massive forest fires in the western part of our country, we have a hurricane that's just come ashore in the Gulf, dumping a meter of water onto Biloxi and Mobile, Alabama. Donald Trump says it'll start getting cooler. You just wait. Reminiscent of his response to COVID-19. It's going to all go away. Don't worry about it. And he has followed the same formula. Ignore the science, ignore the experts, discount even his own national security experts. In contrast, I think that Vice President Biden has posed a formula, a solution, a way out of what are multiple crises that we're facing in the United States, and that you talked about, Megan, in the introduction. The intersection of a healthcare crisis, an economic crisis, in our country, a deep racial justice crisis, and of course, the climate crisis. And to do that, he's proposed a massive investment in clean energy to build a just and equitable economy. 40% of that investment going to distressed communities and communities of color, to create millions of good paying jobs, union jobs, and to leave the world better off for future generations. Mm-hmm. So it's exactly the vision that I think is embodied in the Green Deal in Europe. It needs to be the vision that we have for our world so that we coordinate a recovery out of the post-COVID-19 economic crisis in a way that is going to build sustainability, but address these other issues of income inequality, unjust society, racial disparities. And so we're excited, I think, because it'll be up to the American people. They can, and I know I saw Tim Dixon's polling from earlier in the week. We've done a lot of polling here too. And I think that the polling that you saw from Tim sort of understates the way people are feeling about climate denial right now, because they're experiencing such tremendous stress, not only being locked up by COVID, but what's happening in the natural world.
Right. You know, it is an impressive document that, or platform, I guess, that Biden's been able to pull together. And it looks like it is the culmination of all of this work of grassroots movements, of workers, of environmentalists, and finding that common ground and relieving those tensions by figuring out what these solutions can be. It's really impressive.
Well, I think the Democratic Party is quite unified. This summer, there was a special committee that Speaker Pelosi set up, chaired by Congresswoman Kathy Castor, that issued a report very resonant with what Biden's proposed. And in the Senate, there was just an introduction on both sides of a resolution called Thrive, which our leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, endorsed, which is the kind of second generation of the Green New Deal. So there's a broad, deep commitment by Democrats. unfortunately, our friends in the Republican Party have kind of lost their marbles and sort of followed Trump down this tract of anti-science, climate denial. There are a few exceptions in the Northeast amongst the governors, but at the congressional level, they're just completely in denial about what's happening in the world.
Okay, hold that thought because I want to come back to it. Mayor Gergely Karacsony, I'd like to welcome you to the panel, coming all the way from Budapest. And you ran on a platform for a greener and fairer Budapest. And I wonder, was that a tough sell for you in your campaign? I mean, there's a difference between the big American politics with these two big parties and then municipal campaigns where you're really on the ground. Was it a tough sell, or did people see that link between environment and economy?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me on the panel. It's really very honoring for me to be here and to talk about these global issues which are present all around the globe, in Budapest and elsewhere. Well, I would like to share a few thoughts on Hungarian internal affairs. I won the elections here in Budapest in last fall. That was the biggest political change in the last decade here in Hungary. In 2010, the current governmental coalition achieved a super majority, and basically they could do whatever they wanted to. They could change the constitution, and they actually did many things. And as a protest vote, actually, the voters in Budapest and in major cities across Hungary elected mayors from the opposition. Among those candidates, I was honored to be included as well. So basically, I don't know whether it was my person or it was against the government who actually people actually voted for, but I'm sure that 75% of the young people are supportive of my policies. Young people perfectly understand that this is not only about politics, about internal affairs, but it's more about their future. They wanted to vote for a more livable city, for a greener city. We have Climate for Future right here in Hungary as well, the green movements. And obviously the younger voters understand perfectly what these movements are for and that Budapest needs to change. The green program, besides, I think it's not only important for Budapest, it's important for Hungary. Hungary is a lot poorer country than your countries, than the countries that you come from. And it's half marginalized country in the European Union. So maybe in Hungary we do not have the same set of issues or same set of problems that the developed Western world has. But the green change in the economy for Budapest and for Hungary would definitely be an opportunity. It would be a huge opportunity. So we need to take advantage of this crisis, because starting over always gives you a hope to have a better outcome, right? So if we use better the EU project, the EU funding, for instance, we will not only be able to restore our economy to the level where it was before, but we can also change the mindsets of people. We can have investments here where we can have not only economic recovery and economic growth, but we can have also a greener economy, and we could have synergy in there. Let me give you one very specific example. Here in Budapest, if we could change or refurbish residential homes, 33% of them, making them more energy efficient, then we could create tens of thousands of jobs. We could save hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the middle class in Hungary would be born, in my belief, if we could do that, because we are on the margins, I said, at the periphery of the European Union, in many senses of the word. We are lagging behind, but if we could do that change, we could have a very nice outcome also in terms of income, also in terms of economic growth, and we could a little bit close the gap between Hungary and the more developed countries. So I think, and we shouldn't be going through all the steps the Western countries went through, because we could immediately jump to more developed technologies. We would not need to use obsolete technologies anymore. But the big question is, again, whether we will be able or not to use in the most appropriate way the funds. I come from a country which is on the top of the list of the Olaf list. And I had the chance to talk to President Timmermans many times on this topic. It's very important that local authorities, local governments are involved in solving the crisis. It's very important. Of course, there are lots of countries where you have a very nice use of the funds and there's no corruption, indeed. And that would be very nice. But still, in those cases, it would be important to involve local authorities, municipalities in using the funds. That would increase, on the one hand, transparency, but on the other hand, it would bring closer the decision to the citizens, to the voters, and that would generate not only responses, solutions to all the issues, but also to other issues which are very much tangled in with the global issues. Populism, for instance. We see populism in the decisions of the US president, and that is very familiar to us here in Hungary. We see that. And what's the essence of right-wing populism? You give simple but wrong answers to complicated questions. If you want to have complicated responses, solutions, but right ones for the complicated issues, questions, then you have to go closer to people, because you need to involve those people in your decision-making processes. You have to talk about your dilemmas with the people. You need to make them familiar with your worries, with your thoughts.
Okay, so
it's
yeah, this is actually, thank you, because this is a question I wanted to ask you. Those of us who are progressive, when your win was really incredible, to see such a successful campaign pushing back on that right-wing populism, and also anti-climate rhetoric. And I wonder if you could share some of your learnings from that experience of how to overcome that kind of anti-climate pushback and rhetoric. You did it so successfully.
Az én kampányom arról szólt,
well, my campaign was about me not being the candidate of the opposition, but the candidate of the people against power. And we said, it's not me who is empowered. By electing me, you will empower the citizens of Budapest. You will empower the people. And my friend, the mayor of Istanbul, is a very good example. He's been a very good example. People in big cities face populism. Before the elections, I visited him in Istanbul, and the photographer wanted to take a photo with him in the chair, in the mayor general's chair. And then the mayor said, no, don't do that, because this is not my chair. This is the chair of 16 million Istanbul people. So this is the open government. This is the kind of politics that goes really against populism, which is about real involvement and not manipulation.
Thanks for that. Mr. Podesta, I'll come back to you on this question, but Minister McKenna, I think you might have to slip out a bit early, so I'm gonna skip ahead to you because I really want to ask you a question. Well, you can probably guess about nature. You may have heard Veronica Scotti from Swiss Re in her pitch before this, talking about the role of nature in this recovery. And I'm excited that your background as Minister of Environment, now married with your new portfolio of Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, that you really see this potential for green infrastructure to help us fight climate change. Can you talk a little bit about your thinking when it comes to the role of nature in this kind of post-COVID economic recovery?
Well, thanks, Megan, and it's great to be with all the other panelists. Look, before I go into that, I think it's really important what was just said, that we have to be with people, that people need to understand why it matters that we take action like climate change. We can't sound like environmentalists and shame people. We have to bring people together. It's about clean air, clean water, animals, biodiversity, although even that is an inaccessible word for most people. It's about saving money. It's about good jobs. It's about growth. And the good news when you talk about nature, I think people really get it. So we are in a pandemic, and I think it's interesting. I looked at the polling that you have, although I didn't see Canada there. In Canada, it's actually been pretty good on climate. That through the pandemic, people have said we still care about climate action, but you got to go where people are at. We're in the middle of a pandemic. I've got 3 kids. I'm worried about my kids. They are in school. I hope they're going to stay in school. There's forest fires that are burning in the US. And so the air quality index in BC, in Vancouver, is the worst in the whole world. So if you ask people, do they care about the pandemic? Absolutely. They've got an economic and health crisis, and we need to listen to the science, and politicians need to lead. That's exactly the same thing for climate change. That we will get out of the pandemic, but we're still going to have a climate crisis. And it's an economic crisis, it's a health crisis. We need to listen to the scientists, and politicians need to lead. So why does this matter coming to nature? Because I think about nature a lot now. We've changed our infrastructure programs to have a large focus on natural infrastructure because people have gotten out to nature. That one thing, I'm actually the Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, and I didn't really understand the communities piece in like a sort of deep way, but it's all about our local communities. And so when people get out to nature, they recognize the value of protecting it. And that's another way into climate change. And I just think it's really important. I think that's what you're hearing from, from John, from Franz, from Mayor Gergely, that we need to be thinking about how do we talk about things that people value in a way that they understand, because there's a clear case for action on climate change. So coming to nature, that was a huge priority when I was Minister of Environment and Climate Change. And thank you, Megan. We worked very closely with WWF to do some really important things. We protected a huge amount of our oceans, including over 8% with Inuit. And that was actually, I think it just captured the imagination. And I also was Minister of Parks, and people recognized getting out to parks and protecting these spaces so that people can use them is also incredibly important. So I brought that to my portfolio to say, like, we've thought so traditionally about infrastructure being roads and bridges. It is so much more than that. I mean, it's broadband in the digital economy. We're not talking about that, but of course in COVID, everyone's worried about being connected. And it's actually an equity issue. But so many of these things are not just about hard, like they're not the hard infrastructure. They're the softer pieces, or I don't know how you describe it, but natural infrastructure is both good for adaptation and mitigation. And it also captured the imagination. It's interesting when you look at polling, and one shouldn't just look at polling at all, but it's a snapshot of where people are at. One of the things that people liked the most in terms of things that we announced was planting 2 billion trees, because it was tangible. People were like, yes, we like trees. And it also, depending where you plant them. So I'm actually someone who really believes we have to be, we have to actually get outcomes. I mean, it depends where you plant them, but I think you also have to bring people along. And so I think that is the most important thing on climate. And we're in this situation where we're talking about recovery. How do we invest money? It's not about throwing dollars away. It's about making smart choices, but you can get triple outcomes. So when you look at how you make investments for growth. Where is the growth? The growth is the clean economy. It is quite clear. Everyone knows that. We have a Canada Infrastructure Bank, so stay tuned. That's going to be making some major announcements, but it's going to be very related to where are the opportunities for growth, and also where can you crowd in the private sector, because the private sector knows this. If you're rational, you know where the growth opportunities are, and you also know the risks of not going for those opportunities. But beyond that, you can reduce GHGs at the same time. So when you look at where the jobs are, and I care greatly, I talk a lot to young people. They want jobs that are green. They want to be contributing. But if you look at $1 million spent in traditional infrastructure, you get around 7 jobs. You do it in green infrastructure, which can be natural infrastructure. It can be a whole other range of areas, renewables. It can be public transportation. You're going to get 9 to 13 jobs. So there's a clear GHG piece, a jobs piece, and then there's the equity piece. And I think this is so incredible because John talked about this. It's not just in the US where people are really worried about racism, racial injustice. We see that with not only our racialized communities, but of course with our Indigenous peoples here in Canada. And you can also, when you're triple benefit, you can look at inclusivity. So we look at public transit. That's about people getting around, yes, cleaner, yes, faster, but that's the only way some people can afford to get around. You look at energy efficiency. People should save money. And that's an opportunity to make sure they do that. And our price on pollution, and I know I've done a round circle around nature, but I think that there's a broader piece that is really important. If you look at, we put a price on pollution, let me tell you, that's not easy. And I bear the scars from that. It's, you really have to be tough. And I've realized in this role, you do have to be tough. But we gave more money back. We did it in the most small C conservative way. Put a price on what you don't want and give money to people so they can make their own decisions and they can be part of this. And I think that's so incredibly important that we always remain focused on people, and then we can do this. And I think in Canada, people get it. They know we need to get out of the pandemic. Absolutely. That is the day-to-day. They're worried about their kids. They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about their health. But they also get that we have a bigger crisis that we still have to focus on. But it's up to politicians to help them along and talk about the case and talk about the facts and talk about the science and talk about clean air, clean water, animals, and nature.
Thanks. I don't mind the roundabout circle at all because it shows how connected this is. Mr. Timmermans, this is a little bit about how, like what you said at the very beginning about how these issues are so interconnected. And the minister talks about the potential for jobs, the potential for climate change, the potential for equity. And I know that you are also responsible for developing the biodiversity strategy for 2030. And I wonder if you have any learnings to share with us about we're talking about the role of nature. This is also habitat. This also has the potential to increase the diversity of life on our planet.
Well, first of all, when we did our impact assessment on increasing our reduction target for 2030, we used the last data we got from UNFCCC, and it showed that there's a huge potential for carbon sink. So nature can be actually a really good engine to create more carbon sink, and that's why the minister was referring to a popular program in Canada. The announcement we made that we want to plant 3 billion trees in the next 10 years is one of the most popular things we've announced because people really understand what we're saying, and we can really translate that also in what it does in terms of carbon sink, improving our biodiversity. Because man, that's not going well, and that's the understatement of the year. We're really in serious risk of losing 1 million species, and we're almost reaching tipping points in terms of pollinators, etc., that will kill our agriculture. So this is really serious. But we can do something about this, and the point is that you need to give people sort of places where they can engage themselves, because I don't worry a lot anymore about climate deniers, even if there's one sitting in the White House. I worry more about climate desperation, people saying, well, it's all lost and I can't do anything about it, so let's live it out, or let's try and save ourselves. And if you can give people some issues, they can really act themselves and show, hey, this has an effect. You know, one of the most popular pieces of legislation we offered, I prepared in the last 5 years, was the single-use plastics legislation. And it had an immediate effect on plastics going into the oceans, etc. And people say, hey, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing this myself. So this is something we need to do. But listening to the debate, there's one issue I want to raise, because it's one of the most difficult issues, one of the most difficult, hardest nuts to crack. You know, our cities and our rural areas are getting more and more apart, socially, politically, economically. And, you know, together with Mike Bloomberg, I chair this organization called the Global Covenant of Mayors, where you get 10,000 cities from all over the world together with great ideas that we learn from each other, etc. But increasingly, I come to the conclusion that cities should feel extremely responsible for rural areas, because if we don't share that responsibility, you know, the political divide you see in the US and in Europe very often goes along those lines of rural versus cities. And if we cannot build bridges between the two, it's the populists that will win everywhere. We cannot win this fight if we're not able to build bridges. And this is an issue I wanted to raise here, because I believe we need to find ways of giving hope and perspective to, because they're losing their best and brightest people, all leaving to the cities. The agricultural policy is leading to decline in terms of economic revenue, biodiversity loss, etc. We need to give them a perspective. And I think changing our agricultural policy is one element. Bringing broadband everywhere in rural areas is one element. Distance working is going to be one element. I see it in my own country, young families saying, oh, these big cities, housing is very expensive. Hey, I found ways of working a bit more distance. Why don't I buy a house in rural areas? I mean, these are also things we need to stimulate if we want everybody to buy into this idea that we can have a sustainable society.
Yeah, I'm processing a lot of what you said. You hit the nail on the head when you talked about that divide. Mr. Podesta, I'm sure it rang true for you as well, and you're seeing it play out. I wonder if you know, here in Canada, we are very aware of what's happening in the US as our closest neighbor. What can we learn? What can Canada learn from what's happening in the US right now, especially around anti-climate populism and this divide, this rural-urban divide that Mr. Timmermans is talking about?
Well, just to add to the complication,
yeah,
I very much resonated to what he said. Our Constitution is structured in a way because of our Senate is structured with 2 members for each state. So California has the same representation as Wyoming, and the Electoral College gives a premium, I think, to rural communities. But fundamentally, this is a question of having a set of ideas that will provide people opportunity to live decent lives in those places. I think they have felt, in essence, left out, left behind, sort of looked down upon. That's been exploited. That was really the secret to, I think, Trump's victory in those upper Midwest states, to suggest that the Democratic Party had abandoned you. They don't care about you. That's what he's still, in essence, running on in 2020. And we need a response to that by saying that there are opportunities to lead good lives by having those kind of job opportunities that have been alluded to by both the minister and the president. So I think that what we're trying to do politically is kind of reach out to those communities. Right now, though, the politics, if you kind of look at where things stand, it's still challenging. I mean, I think that there's a tremendous divide in this country. I think President Timmermans' idea of linking cities to rural communities is a kind of interesting one. But I think mostly it's about making those social connections and creating the infrastructure that gives people the opportunity to participate in in the modern economy that is one part broadband, another part trying to ensure that educational opportunities are there. But it's a challenging part of our politics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's challenging here too in Canada, not to the degree, but we certainly see it. Minister McKenna, now that it's been 1 year since the federal election, and during the election we had breathtakingly large, excitingly large climate demonstrations in different cities across Canada, and I think my impression was the voters did send a message that they were tired of inaction on climate change and tired of the rhetoric, the anti-climate rhetoric, and saying enough is enough. But I wonder, a year later, what are some takeaways from you when you think back about that election and where Canadians were at on this?
Well, I mean, look, there's a lot to say about that election.
Yeah.
It was a really tough election. It wasn't 2015. And I mean, look, personally, I think I spent so much time thinking about this because I really lived this whole divide. Probably have the moniker, Climate Barbie for the rest of my life. And I didn't like it. I'm from Hamilton. I'm a competitive swimmer. I'm Irish extraction. I'm tough. But I don't think it's good for anyone to have these fights. But, the reality is there's going to be some tension. And the young people are demanding change. And they've been so inspiring to me because, they just are able to see clearly. We're talking about in 2030, 2050, that is not very long. And I think it's a reality check. At the same time, maybe because I'm from Hamilton, and Hamilton is a steel town, and it's been really tough in Hamilton, that you also have to recognize that people deserve jobs and they deserve economic opportunity. And, they have to figure out how to pay their bills. And so I think this is a really, I think it's really important that we not get disconnected from people. And by that, I mean everyone. And it doesn't matter whether they just vote for you, because life isn't just about winning elections. Life is actually about doing things. And you have to be worried about regional tensions. I kind of feel like I could have a beer with anyone, but there were certainly people who were like, gosh, you just want to take my job and destroy my community. But it's, so I think you really have to be thoughtful about policies. We decided to phase out coal, obviously extremely important, given how polluting coal is. And we have a huge opportunity in Canada. We're already 80% clean power. But we created the first Just Transition Task Force, maybe in the world, I don't know, but we actually went to communities where we were saying, we're phasing out your job, because that's what it is. And you can't just be abstract about it and sit in downtown Toronto or Montreal or Ottawa and not think about the impacts of the decisions you make. And it was amazing because we had labor leaders there, we had members of the community, and 600 people would show up in these in these town halls. And yeah, some of them were really mad, and some of them were really upset, and some of them were really worried. And that is totally normal. But I think they did appreciate at the end, we were actually listening to their concerns. And I talked to one of the labor leaders, and he said it actually kind of changed him, because he realized that, people deserve opportunities, and there's ways you can do it. So they do want investments in infrastructure. That's totally reasonable. As we develop policies, we need to think about what are the opportunities for farmers and what are the impacts that might be unintended consequences. And I think there's huge opportunities. I mean, when you look at biofuels, you look at carbon sinks, there's some real opportunities. But I think we always have to be vigilant. It's a very different climate. I could have a whole discussion about what's happening online and the impact that has to discourse. That I think that is extremely worrying. I mean, that is not unrelated to being able to get serious climate action or to the health of our democracies. But I think just going forward, you need to be very mindful. You need to be mindful of the generational divide. You need to be mindful of regional divides. You need to be mindful of urban versus cities. You're not going to solve all those things, but you have to think really hard about them. And I come back to what I said before. People are reasonable. It was Jean Chrétien, former prime minister, said to me, he said in French, les Canadiens sont raisonnables, soyez raisonnables. I don't know that he was thinking we were so reasonable at the time, but he said, be reasonable. And so I think when you talk about things that matter, you talk about where the jobs are going to be. You talk about, animals. You talk about protecting land and water. You talk about, providing opportunities. You talk about saving money, those are real things, but it's very hard. And, the context south of the border can be extremely challenging here. And I think we need to be mindful of that. And you just work with who your partners are. And France, we created the Ministerial on Climate Action after, there was a change in direction in the United States. And we said, we're just going to move forward. And you do have to find your allies in life. And so getting back to one, you have to be making sure you're bringing everyone together as much as you can, but also you need to go with people who believe in this. And the good news now is I've seen it in the US, that business is on board. I've seen cities are on board. And I think people are starting to get it. And once again, I think COVID is actually not a bad way to kind of talk about climate, because it's a health crisis first and foremost, it's an economic crisis. We got to listen to the science, and we have to provide leadership. And I think that that's a way to talk, certainly a way I believe we can talk to Canadians. And you know what, we just have to keep on keeping on. I have 3 kids, and that is the thing every day, even when it's hard. And I know that's true for everyone else on this panel. We owe it to everyone to just do everything we can, use every tool in our toolbox to try to bring people together and just damn well move forward.
So as someone who cares deeply about the environment, I found the last election, electoral outcomes aside, the discussion around the election was really inspiring for me. I felt like there was this, whoa, I don't know if everybody else can. I feel like I need to be more inspirational. Was that my cue to be more inspirational?
Oh, that was really awesome. That was your lead in. You maybe had a different experience with the election. I was just like, how to get this right, but it's good. You were totally inspired.
I was pretty inspired by the conversations around the election. I really think it was a bit of a watershed for us as Canadians to say, hey, climate really matters. And maybe we don't know what that means. Maybe we don't know what it is that we want politicians to do, but we want you to know that it matters.
No, and actually, you know what? Okay, so maybe, I have slight PTSD being in politics, you get that? No, look, in the end, we brought in a price on pollution, and, the election was, I don't know if it's totally a referendum on that, but, look at where people ended up. Yeah. They supported parties that overwhelmingly that supported putting a price on pollution, which is really hard. And there was a recognition that we need to take action on climate change. And I kind of like it because it wasn't just, young people, it was their parents. And often it was their grandparents who said, I didn't really understand this issue until I saw my granddaughter or grandson marching in the streets. And I recognized, wait a minute, it's not just about the here and now, it's about their future. And I love them. And I want to make sure that they have, the opportunity for, a healthy planet. And so in that sense, it was inspirational. I mean, it was a bit tough, I think, at points. Some of the rhetoric was over the top. But you're right, we got a good outcome. And I think, I actually am heartened by where Canadians are at. I saw the polling. I actually don't buy that Canadians, are less inclined in action on climate change. They are just, of course, focused on the pandemic, and they have to be.
Yeah. You brought up several times the role of young people, and Mayor Caraccione, I know that young people came out and supported you and really heard your message. And that's the golden nut that so many elected officials are trying to crack. How do we mobilize young people and get them to pay attention to this? Not pay attention to environment, because they're paying attention to environment. I don't know if you saw the video of Martin Moore ahead of time, and he was talking about potentially offering a program, kind of like a Peace Corps program, where there's 1 year environmental service. I don't know if that resonates for you, or if there were other things that you found worked, but how did you manage to get so much support from youth?
Igen, láttam ezt a videót, és ez a
Yes,
kezdeményezés.
I did see the video, and I very much liked the initiative. There's a lot of frustration in the young people. They are climate anxious, and we need to turn that around into some action and to channel that for the benefit of of people. I have two children, 20-year-old and a 10-year-old, 20 and 10-year-old. And I talk to them a lot about climate change, about insecurities in the world around them. COVID-19, that brings about a lot of uncertainties. We do not know how deep the crises will be, but we see the health effects. You see a generation, they go to school, next day they don't go. So they are going to be definitely different adults than we are. They will have a lot more uncertainties. They will be a lot more uneasy about the future. So it's very important that we involve them in the dialogue. Maybe we could lower the age, where they are allowed to vote. That would be one means of involving young people. Or we can have, I don't know, student exchange programs, so that we send out children to different countries so they see how democracy works there. So there's lots of things we can do, but it's the reason you mentioned here that we need reasonable solutions. So we need these people to understand what reason is and what reasonable solutions could be. And let me bring to this discussion another topic. It's important that we make young people understand these challenges. But as Madam Minister said, there are lots of divides, political, generational. And what we see that we have a divide between populism and progression, but there are overlaps at the same time. Elderly people understand better. And President Timmermans talked about the divide between big cities and the rural areas. And we see that in Hungary as well. And if we look at the election map in Europe, and we take a look at Poland, I closely watched that because my friend was the candidate for Warsaw mayorship. And young people, more educated young people living in big cities voted for progression, for progress. And the elderly people, let's say the more senior citizens living in the rural areas, voted for populism. And the biggest challenge for me as a mayor is to promote a policy that is about equality, equity, and closing the gap between, young generations, old generations, rural and big cities. That's the biggest challenge to me. How can we change that? How can we get some healthy overlap? How we can have generations brought closer together. How can we tell people that, okay, you need to be on your parents' side, your grandparents' side, and you, parents and grandparents, you need to be on your children's side. And we need to close the gap. And maybe green policy can help here as well, because cities and the surrounding small rural areas can be managed as one single unit, one single administrative unit, so that we can empower local economy, we can strengthen local economy and get a better partnership between the big cities and the surrounding smaller rural areas. For instance, if we are looking for suppliers, agricultural suppliers, and we say, okay, basic foods need to be brought in within a 50-kilometer area, then that is going to be a close partnership between the big city and the surrounding smaller rural areas and villages. But we need to think very clearly about the policies, because there are lots of communities who are, at the periphery. And if they turn against us because of this policy, then we are going to lose them and we are not going to be successful.
Thanks so much for that. Whether it's urban or rural, youth or older, Minister McKenna, quickly before you go, they're all going to need jobs.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a green jobs program. It's great. I actually was just with some students last week. They were testing, they were fishing, so they're catching fish and testing the fish to see the quality of the water. And they're from all across Canada coming together. So the good news is you can You can actually create good jobs. You can give kids experience. Gosh, like kids need jobs now. Young people need a job. We have a jobs crisis for young people. And you can give them, also exchanges of ideas, and it can be from rural areas and from cities. So I think there's a great opportunity. I do have to go. I'll say to the mayor, if you want to do an exchange, I will, once we get out of this pandemic, I promise when people can travel, we can do exchange, young people from either the city of Ottawa or from Canada coming to visit you guys, and you can send some over, because we also need to get out more. I say that to all Canadians. The world is a lot bigger than Canada. And that's a good thing, because there's a lot of people who are working on climate solutions, and we need to be working together. But anyway, great discussion. I need to go back to a cabinet meeting because I have to stay in cabinet so I can keep on advocating for the environment and the economy. They go hand in hand. But anyway, wonderful discussion. Thanks to everyone. Hopefully someday we can all share a beer together.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Mr. Timmermans, before I hand over to you to close, Mr. Podesta, I just wanted to throw back to you, because I find the work that you're doing with the Center for American Progress, man, it's really capturing the ideas of young Americans, and really just, it's such a youth-inspired movement. And I wonder what we can learn from how you've been able to harness that energy.
Well, the smartest thing we've done from the beginning when I started in 2003 was we hire a lot of young people.
Yeah.
And we give them a lot of responsibility and power. And we listen to what their ideas are. And that helps really, I think, shape our program and respond to the things they're feeling. And just before I turn things back, as I'm listening to the conversation about populism, and as a segue to the next session, one of the things that's feeding that populism is the division that's being sown in social media, particularly as a result of disinformation. And that is a particular concern, I think, of ours at the Center for American Progress. We've been trying to fight against that. I started essentially a political organization. It's called Climate Power 2020, which elevated that. But in this climate space, the division being sown between people who want solutions, people who want to embrace the future, people who see the potential for innovation, versus the disinformation that's coming from the other side, that's denying reality, that's blaming it on all kinds of outside sources and foreign sources, is really a huge problem. And I think, in addition to solving these issues in terms of job creation, et cetera, we have to solve this fundamental democratic problem of getting back a public space where we can have serious dialogue based on facts, and then different ideas about how to solve the challenges going forward. But thank you, Megan, for a great conversation.
My pleasure, and I agree. Quelle belle conversation. Merci beaucoup. Thank you, everyone. This was fantastic. I learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure that everybody tuning in did as well. Mr. Timmermans, it's over to you to wrap.
Wow, how do I wrap this up? But first, let me refer to something that Anne Applebaum said to me last year. She said, the invention of the printing press led to huge democratization of information and to 100 years of religious wars. And I think if you look at what our information society is doing, it's leading to a democratic wave, and at the same time, it's causing huge disruption in relationships, in behavioral patterns, etc. And I think one of our main tasks is to make sure that this does not lead to another 100 years of religious wars, and that we channel this into the right direction. And education and engaging with young people is going to be essential in all of this. Second comment: the pandemic, the industrial revolution we're in, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, they're all rolled into one. They all lead to a huge need for redistribution. Between social classes, between generations, between nations, within nations. And the only way we can get the politics right of the transition we need to go through is if we have a credible plan for redistribution that leaves no one behind. And this means that you cannot dissociate climate policy from taxation policies. You cannot dissociate tackling COVID from trade policy. So the interesting thing is, and the complicated thing is, all these things are linked. And this is something I really retained also from our conversation. And so we will need to have truly a transformational approach to this, and a progressive transformational approach to this. We know exactly what the populist answer to all of this is. We need to have an answer that is credible, that people can understand, people can relate to, people feel part of, and it's going to be complicated. That's the problem of our politics. It's never simple. And we are in a post-paternalistic society, also because of this information revolution. People will believe anything because they don't believe in anything anymore. And so we need to reshape that. And I work with young people. Well, I've got 4 kids, and I've recently even become a grandfather. So I live with them, but I also work with them a lot. Their idealism is a source of huge inspiration, but we need to give them a place where this idealism can be made concrete. And I believe ideas such as social service, such as we have a group of volunteers in the European Union, a group that we created in the migration crisis. We could just reshape that into volunteers that act in other crises, whether it's the pandemic or the climate crisis. So let's embolden and weaponize, in fact, our youngest generation to do this. It will certainly inspire the older generations, because let me end on something Willy Brandt said many years ago. Positive societal change is always a result of an alliance between grandchildren and their grandparents. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you. So everyone, that was a fantastic panel on sustainability in a post-COVID recovery and an economic recovery. And I tweeted out what the conversation was going to be. Is it possible to have a just and green recovery? And I spoiled it. I said yes. So my big questions to you were about how, and examples that we can learn from here in Canada, from your experiences. And thank you so much for delivering that. Please help me thank Frans Timmermans, the first Vice President of the European Commission, the Honourable Catherine McKenna, Canadian Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, Gergely Karaskonya, Mayor of Budapest, and John Podesta, Founder and Director of the Center for American Progress. And in sign language, applause is this. So let me give you a round of applause. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
And Megan, you forgot yourself. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. To our whole panel, I want to thank you very, very much for taking some time to join us today. I have Megan, I don't know if you're like me, but I have a laundry list of notes that I have taken here throughout the entire session. Some really great ideas and consensus. And to Mayor Karaskonya, I think I know a few young people that work for Canada 2020 that would be interested in that exchange program. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. We are going to take a quick break. And when I say quick, I mean, like, I think 3-4 minutes at the most before we start our next panel on democracy and institutions, co-chaired by the Right Honourable Helle Thorning-Schmidt, the former Prime Minister of Denmark. This is going to be fantastic, really interesting, and underpins a lot of what we've talked about. So I encourage you to stay tuned for that session. And once again, a huge thank you to all of today's panelists for our sustainability conversations.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and well, good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Dawn Nakagawa, the Executive Vice President of the Berggruen Institute and the co-director of the Future of Democracy Project. So welcome to the Recovery Summit and to this panel on democracy and institutions. We are very fortunate today to have a fantastic panel to talk about the very critical conversation around democratic reform. The fact that democracy is in crisis is a surprise to nobody. Frankly, our institutions at the beginning of the third decade of the 21st century feel like they are almost all in a state of tumult. And I think that that presents us obviously with a set of challenges, but also a remarkable set of opportunities for reform. About 6 months ago, the Berggruen Institute published a report called Renewing Democracy for the Digital Age, upon which much of the conversation we're going to have today will be framed. The report basically puts forward a framework how we might reform democracy and pointed to 3 critical areas. The first and most foundational is the social cohesion. Essentially, without a sense of solidarity, a sense that people belong together, political compromise becomes impossible. We need that sense of belonging and a belief that there are trade-offs to be made for a greater good in order for democracy to function. The second area that we looked at was how do you build an informed citizenry capable of dialogue and deliberation in a way that can formulate solutions and be forward-looking. And in order to do that, we looked quite carefully at the information ecosystem and what kind of changes we would need there in order to ensure that we have a group of citizens that are ready and capable of deliberation and can make informed decisions. And the final area we looked at was institutional reform. Our societies have evolved quite a bit. Technology brings us a host of new opportunities. And what we need to do with that in order to re-legitimize democracy is to engage people broadly and deeply in the process of decision making. And going back to the first 2 solution areas, we need them to believe they belong together and we need them to be well informed. So those were the 3 areas that we looked at, and the report put forward solutions in all of those areas. We'll be discussing some of those today with our fantastic panel, which includes Helde Thorning-Schmidt, who is the co-chair of the working group. So we're very excited to have her here today, as well as others who were involved in the work and some who weren't. But before we get there, we're going to start with a few video pitches, many of which are based on the solutions that we put forward in the report. So we hope that you will go to berggruen.org, download the report, read it, and give us your feedback after this conversation. But first, let's go to the video pitches. One is by Ben Scott, who's the executive director of Reset Tech. We have another one by Karen Kornbluh, who's with the German Marshall Fund, and Emily Bell, who's the founding director of the Tau Center for Communications, and who were both part of the working group. We also have one by Tom Steinberg, the founder of and director of My Society, and finally Matthew Mendelson, the visiting professor from Ryerson University. So without further delay, let's go to the pitches, and we look forward to seeing you back here afterwards.
Hello, my name is Ben Scott. I am the executive director of an organization called Reset, which you can visit at reset.tech online. We're focused on protecting democracy from new and emerging threats that technology and information markets bring to the relationship between media and democracy. And that's what I want to talk about today, and in particular about what we've learned about the relationship between technology, media, and democracy in the context of the pandemic. One of the things that I think all of us were focused on during this crisis is how we get reliable information about public health. And in the search for reliable information, unfortunately, a lot of people fell victim to conspiracy theories and sensationalism and fraud about COVID-19. And that distracted from the effort to protect the public health and expose a lot of the vulnerabilities that we have in our current information markets. And it brings to the light the question, How did this happen? How is it possible that digital media, Google and Facebook and Twitter, who were meant to empower people and decentralize communication systems and give voice to the voiceless, how did they become a pernicious vector of disinformation and conspiracy theory that's harming our societies? And I think to get at the reasons why that happens, you have to go back and look at what the old media world looked like versus the new media world. In the search for trusted information in the 20th century, we had limited options. There was no internet, but we had broadcasters and we had newspapers and we had conventional media channels who had branded reputations for delivering particular types of content. And we, as a public audience, understood where they were coming from and why they made the decisions they made to give us different kinds of content, because there are human beings in the editorial rooms making those decisions, and we understood what their motives were, at least implicitly. Translate that now forward to the Google and Facebook era, where by and large, more and more of us are getting our news through social media feeds, through the results of searches. And what we find is we can no longer rely on human editors and our understanding of why they chose what to give us on the front page of the newspaper or in the headlines of the broadcast in the evening. What we get are super editors who combine all the information on the web and compress it into a very curated stream of information designed just for us. And those super editors are not human beings who work for Google and Facebook. They're algorithms, they're machines. And the machines don't care at all about what information we need to have in order to be good citizens or to be good parents or good neighbors. The information that the super editors, that the machine of Google and Facebook give us, those machines are interested in maximizing the amount of time we spend staring at our screens, because the more time we spend staring at our screens, the more ads they can show us and the more money the companies make. That's the nature of the business. But what that means is there's an incentive for these algorithms to go ahead and give us more and more content that is sensational, more and more content that is confrontational, that is conspiratorial, because that catches our eye. That keeps us looking. We're human beings. We follow what is interesting, attractive, outrageous, new, different. The things about public health that we need to know that keep us safe are sometimes technocratic or boring, and they don't get prioritized in those feeds. And as a result, what we find with the pandemic, as well as with sensational politics and with racial conflict and with all kinds of different controversial issues in our society, what rises to the top is not what we need to know, but what pushes our buttons. And this is fundamentally damaging. The super editors have supplanted the human editors. The machines have taken the place of journalists, and we are suffering the consequences. We are losing trust in public information. We are losing core aspects of what it means to have a functional democracy in a media environment that can support it. We now have a media system that doesn't allow us, most of the people, most of the time, to access the same set of facts. We have a digital media system that doesn't give us space for civil deliberation, where people who disagree with one another can come together and try to find common ground. And it pushes us away from an idea of common purpose or national unity. These are the problems that are evident when you look at what happened in information markets around the pandemic. They are a symptom of a broader underlying problem in the relationship between technology, media, and democracy. And it's one that we need to recognize and address. We've had a massive paradigm shift in the way information is controlled and distributed in our societies, and we have not yet caught up with that shift with new regulations for that market, new ideas about education and socialization, about our role as citizens and consumers. And that is, I hope, one of the takeaways from recovery in the pandemic is that we get serious about how we're going to live as digital media consumers in the 21st century. Food for thought. Thanks.
Public interest journalism is in crisis. Across our democracies, its voice and authority have shrunk. The unregulated ecosystem of social media, in which quality journalism is forced to operate, has challenged journalism's ability to provide and distribute truthful and accurate information. This is undermining the integrity of our democracies. Democracy depends on meaningful deliberation informed by high-quality information. Social media depends on constant engagement, largely achieved by sharing micro-targeted, divisive, out-of-context, and misleading content. The two do not work together. What can we do about it?
A public interest media fund would rebuild the public square that's been bulldozed by social media. Quality journalism is expensive to produce. Investigation, editing, and fact-checking don't come cheap. However, disinformation is produced and spread at a fraction of the cost. Strengthening the independent press can help create a healthier public square where we engage in constructive debate. Citizens can better assess what's happening in their own communities to make informed decisions about key issues that affect them and hold those in positions of power to account.
The advertising revenue that once supported local media, investigative journalism, and other hard news has shifted to larger digital platforms such as Google and Facebook. Google and Facebook combined now capture 58% of the US market, followed by Amazon, Microsoft, and Verizon. The Cairncross Review acknowledged that Facebook, Google, and the shift of distribution and advertising revenues to large technology platforms have damaged some parts of journalism to a point where the market cannot repair them.
A fund dedicated to supporting public interest journalism could limit eligibility to outlets that meet international standards for independent journalism, such as those of the International Fact-Checking Network's Code of Principles. These include a commitment to non-partisanship and fairness, transparency of sources, transparency of funding and organisation, transparency of methodology, and an open and honest corrections policy. It could also provide funding to organisations like the Trust Project, which is a coalition of news media that assesses the quality and credibility of the content produced. By supporting these types of outlets, we can help ensure the public has access to quality information that is not dependent on or manipulated by government or set by the terms and conditions of digital platforms.
The Public Interest Media Fund could be financed through new taxation applied specifically to technology giants. In this way, digital platforms would be sharing revenue earned through business models that have unfortunately undermined journalism's historic primary source of income. We know that new taxes are coming to these companies anyway. Many governments have been clear about this. What we propose is that a share of this tax is ring-fenced and directed specifically towards public interest journalism, especially local journalism of the kind that has suffered most in the last 2 decades.
By investing in a public interest media fund, we would not turn back the clock to an era when a few large media institutions dominated the information space. Nor would we create a single government news service like the BBC in the United Kingdom. Instead, the vision is to support a variety of new, high-quality media outlets and to build a thriving fourth estate that defends truth, holds power to account, and enables vibrant democratic debate and decision-making.
Thank you very much to the organizers for having me here today. We have learned over the past decade that prosperity, as measured by GDP or unemployment rates or stock market valuations, is not enough. It is not enough to provide working people with the economic security they require, and it is not enough to avert the collapse and unraveling of democratic societies. The current federal government ran in 2015 on shared prosperity, on inclusive growth. It was exactly the right goal then, it remains so today, and it was resisted 5 years ago by the same people who are today resisting, addressing well-known, long-standing policy shortcomings that leave working Canadians vulnerable to a variety of systemic risks. 5 years ago, they said, don't run a deficit, don't increase transfers to low and middle income families and take away benefits from upper income people. Don't increase premiums to more generously fund the Canada Pension Plan. They were wrong then, and they are even more wrong now. The shared prosperity agenda needs to be deepened with actionable, practical policies and programs that can deliver working people with more economic security. So I have 2 pitches today, one about public policy and income security, one about public administration. On policy, If progressives want to capitalize on this moment, we must keep it simple, use existing tools that deliver a real impact on people's lives, and that don't indulge in magical thinking. My policy pitch is that there are three things that will deliver economic security far better than pursuing a universal basic income, which is not a viable way to seize this moment and turn ideas into programs that make a difference in people's lives over the next 12 months. The three things that are a better use of our resources are targeted cash transfers, improved social services, and legislation that improves the quality of work. You first use existing mechanisms that already function, like a universal basic income for most Canadians, to get cash to people in a targeted way. The Canada Child Benefit, the Canada Workers Benefit, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, the Canada Student Grant, disability supports. As we saw, they can be quickly increased based on circumstances. The current government has reformed each of these in the past 5 years to make them more progressive and improve their impact on things that matter, like child poverty. They are easy, elastic, adaptable, deliverable, and they exist. The most important new thing is to add to our suite of income support programs is the formalization of a CERB-like vehicle to act as insurance for those outside the EI system, because childless working age adults are really the only group of Canadians that does not have a program which functions like a UBI. 2, spend more on public services, both existing and new. These serve as a social wage and make life more affordable and more secure. Prioritize by choosing one or two. My preferences are for childcare and home care in partnership with community and civil society organizations. But governing is about making choices, and others will choose other things. 3, we must act on ensuring that gig and low-wage workers have better quality employment. Again, progressive provincial governments have made progress on employment standards, the right to organize minimum wage, the misclassification of gig workers, and other issues, but they remain under threat. And federally, there are off-the-shelf solutions in the form of the expert panel on modern federal employment standards that can be implemented. We need to focus on practical, adaptable, existing solutions that can be scaled. Thank you very much to the organizers for having that. Is not usually a part of budgeting. So, to summarize and tie these 2 points together, if we fail to improve our capacity to understand impact and the economic and social returns of our spending, if we only count the immediate costs of things like childcare and not their long-term returns, it will be much more difficult to address the long-standing policy gaps that this moment requires, and it will be more difficult to deliver real shared prosperity. Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. And thanks to those who submitted those pitches. Hopefully that's got the juices flowing among our audience and our panelists for the discussion that comes next. So we're really fortunate today to have a fantastic panel. We have Mete Koban, who's the founder of an organization called My Life, My Say. It's a youth engagement organization, and I'm looking forward myself to learning more about his organization, what young people are thinking about the state of democracy today and the issues that they're facing. Also, Sandro Gozzi, who is a history-making MEP from the European Parliament. He represents France, even though he's Italian-born, and he is truly a true European. And we're looking forward to hearing from him about the kinds of reforms and citizens' engagement opportunities that that are taking place across Europe, and how the European Union is thinking about this. Also, Eli Pariser, who he is sort of one of the grandfathers, I think, of the idea of the fragmentation of social media contributing to a social fragmentation. He was the one who coined the term filter bubbles, and he is the founder of Upworthy and an organization called Civic Signals. But first, we're going to start with Helle Thorning-Schmidt, who I've had the honor and privilege of working with as co-chair of the Renewing Democracy Project. She is the former Prime Minister of Denmark and the CEO of Save the Children, and has more accomplishments in her career than I can share with you now. But she's also the co-chair of the Facebook Oversight Committee, which will be an interesting conversation today, hopefully part of our conversation, as a move in the direction of trying to solve some of the problems that we've been hearing about in the pitches. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Hele. And Hele, what I'd like to ask you and what I'd like you to open with is just talking a little bit about the need for democratic reform and why you felt you are so involved in this conversation. How do you see it evolving, and what are the reforms that are needed? So welcome.
Well, thanks first to all of you. It's great to be here today, and I really already enjoyed what I've heard. And this is one of the conferences where you're more interested in hearing what everyone else has to say rather than listening to yourself. But I'll be brief about the project that we have here and why we have started this conversation about renewing democracy. And basically, it all started with that it's very clear that we are seeing an increasing trouble for democracy. We are seeing that democracy is not rated the way it was before. We have also done a number of surveys showing that people don't rate democracy as much as they did just 5 or 10 years ago. And our mission was basically to try to ask ourselves, not only why has this happened, of course we're interested in that as well, but also try to understand how can we legitimize democracy, what can be done to do that. And we already heard a few of the ideas that we came up with. But first of all, we had to understand what's challenging democracy, and it's a mixture of things. It is social cohesion, which has been broken. There's so many bonds between us as people in society that has been broken, which means that it's much harder to have democracy. That also means that democracies are not delivering solutions that we would expect them to do. I'll come back to that in a minute. It's also the new digital space, and we heard input on that already. That is a real problem. That the digital space has many good sides to it, but there's also a real issue around it parting us and creating walls between us rather than bridges, which is so important in democracy. And then our institutions, which have simply been too slow to absorb the new ways of wanting to participate that comes from people, and have been very slow in actually translating the old way of vote. If I vote, I get this and that from decision makers. I get specific things that I voted for, and that has year by year turned down that democracy is not only delivering a vote every fourth or fifth year, is also to engage. But all this combined, that we have a consumer democracy, we have democracies that are not delivering the results that we want. I'll come back to that. And also that people are expecting of their democracies that they respond very quickly, very measured, here and now, to the issues that they are facing. So let me come back to the what I see as the big issues. Democracies are not delivering on the things that people care about, and that comes both from the right and from the left, from older people, from younger people. They're seeing that democracies are not delivering. What are they not delivering on? Well, they're not delivering right now on climate change, on hunger, the Sustainable Development Goals, on war and creating more peace. They're not delivering on a global pandemic as we are seeing. They're not delivering on economic crisis, and many people will say that democracies are not delivering on equity and personal security in all its aspects. So this, I think, is the core of the problem with democracy. But then, of course, there is the way democracy functions, and that's what we have been really focused on, that democracies are not functioning in a way so they absorb the new ways that people want to engage. We are seeing people in rallies, in marches, and demonstrations. They're forming big groups on social media with like-minded people, thereby forming less bridges, more walls, as I was saying. And all this means that democracy is failing day by day. Our conclusion, and of course I have 5 minutes, so it's hard to go through the whole report. Our conclusion is that we have to create a completely new way of civic engagement. where we find new ways of reinvigorating democracy by bringing young people together in purposeful functions. We have many ideas for that. By creating new ways of participating. This is something that has been tested in various countries, some with absolutely fabulous success, where civic organization and civic debates and civic decision makings has been the precursor for bigger decisions in government, and thus changing our perception of democracy as something where we are consumers voting every 4th or 5th years to become engaged citizens. And that's why we are talking about creating a citizens' democracy. We have many more ideas in the report. I would urge everyone to read it, but this is just a little taste of the way we are thinking, and also the next steps that could be taken to be changing our democracies in order for our democracies to survive.
All right, thank you so much, Helen. Thank you. I just want to ask you one more question before we go to the rest of the panel, which I'm very excited to do and hear from them. Why do we think that more participation is the answer, particularly, given how challenging it's going to be in a really diverse, increasingly diverse society, where formerly marginalized voices are now in the process? It's of course going to make us, a richer, I think, more robust dialogue, but also a more challenging one. So why is more participation the answer at this point?
Well, it's not the only answer. I have kept saying also in our dialogue around this through the time we've been working on this, that I actually think that democracies can only survive if they start taking better decisions. Democracies are what they do, because if democracies can't solve the really big questions, why would people support them? So that's one thing. That's participation is not the only thing, but what we have found out is in order for people to leave this notion that you can have a voice only on social media and that's democracy, you can rally, you can do marches, you can do all kinds of things. We have to connect these new ways of engaging and in many ways giving agency to people. We have to connect those ways into our institutions. And what we have seen now is actually institutions going in a complete parallel to the ways of engaging that many people are involved in. So this is why I really firmly believe if institutions don't change and if we don't find new ways of participating, it will be very hard for democracies to survive. So that is why it is so important that we find new ways. And all ideas are welcome. We have a list of proposals, but those will not be the only ones. So every day we actually have to renew democracy. And in many ways, that is what we have missed doing. We haven't renewed democracy. There was a time where in Europe, for example, we built up the welfare state. Every year, everyone had more access to more welfare. And everyone thought, hey, that's democracy, that we get more access to better health, to better education, all those things. But that is not democracy. Democracy is actually to participate, to listen to other people, to listen, that the majority listens to the minority, that we have a conversation. And the headline for everything that we have been working on is to how to restart this conversation. And that's a real conversation where we don't just meet in the echo chambers that social media creates for us, but actually meet and discuss with each other and create new bridges. And the only way we can do that is new civic engagement.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Helen. So I'm going to open it up to the rest of the panel. I'm going to start with Sandro, but I just wanted to remind everybody, if you want to submit questions, which we hope we'll have time to take at the end, you have to go to slido.com, #recovery summit, and submit your questions there. All right, so Sandro, welcome, and thank you for being with us today. We have seen, as Helen was talking about, this increasing participatory impulse is being harnessed by policymakers across the EU. We saw the citizens' assemblies used in France and used in Ireland to look at very important issues of our time. We've seen referendum increase and so on. Can you talk, I guess, a little bit about the thinking in Europe around the use of these tools and why this seems like, the right time to be engaging in this way?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, first of all, for giving this opportunity. And I would say that I share most of what Elle just said, and some of the answer to your question have already been given. But basically, for me, the issue of participation, of new citizen participation, is linked to two questions. The first question is the question of method, of a new democratic method. The second question is the question of playing field, a new policy and political playing field. And in the 4 minutes and a half which I'm left, I will try to give you the answer about this too. Method. It is clear that the time where democracy was, democratic participation was, I go to the elections, I vote, I make my choice, and I wait for the end of the term to judge what the government or the parliament which I have elected will do, is over. I don't say that the moment of election is not an important moment. It is absolutely important, and we have to do much more to increase participation to the elections. We know that except the last European elections in all our countries, the participation, the turnout to the polls is decreasing, whereas we should increase it. But this is not enough. Citizens now expect to participate, directly participating, or also during the term, between one election and the other, and the next elections. And this is why in Europe we have seen blossoming a new form of citizens consultation, participation, organized debate, which in my view have been always very positive. I mean, the experience that we've seen with citizens' assemblies in Ireland to prepare difficult debates, such as the debate on the referendum on gay marriage, on the abortion. They proved to be very helpful, not only because there were citizens participating and debating, but because those debates were public and everybody could recognize himself in this citizens debate from the bottom, a sort of grassroots debate. We have another experience which in its form, in the form of consultation, as a new democratic participation experience is very positive. It's the one that we have used in France for this citizen convention on climate change. Now the issue is how will be the answer of the French authorities, because the citizens have been working, meeting, discussing for 6 months, have made very clear requests. It is clear that now politics must say, we agree on this, we don't agree with that. They always have to motivate the reason why they want to give a follow-up, or they can't, or they don't want to give a follow-up to the citizens' request. Transparency, full transparency in the motivation. It is essential for the exercise. And then they have to say, well, this request require a constitutional modification, this request require new legislation, this request require new political actions. What is important, if you want really to nurture democracy through this form of participation, is that we always give a follow-up and the dialogue continue during the follow-up. This is absolutely essential. The other issue is the issue of playing field. Why today democracy is in crisis? Democracies and politics are in crisis because so far they mostly remain prisoner of the national borders. They think that they can provide concrete answer to citizens on issues which are transnational issues only by playing in the national level playing field. Whereas when you're confronted with climate change, with terrorism, with the challenges of digital and global digital issues, global financial issues, it is clear that we have to build up a new playing field. We have to position ourselves into a new playing field, which is the playing field of transnational politics and transnational democracy. That means from the European perspective, to work much more at European level, but from a global perspective, to bet much more on new form of global governance, a new form of multilateral governance, because that's the place, that's the new playing field, and that's the way of providing concrete answer, which is the only way of regenerate citizens' confidence in democracy. And this is why, it will be my last word, this debate that we are promoting, we want to launch a conference of the future of Europe. We want to promote a conference with new way of citizen participation, both physical and digital. And this is why this exercise is so important, because it provides a possible new answer to the request for new democratic method, but also to the need for a new playing field, which is in our case, European playing field.
All right, thank you so much, Sandro. Yeah, I think that there is this, as you were talking about the consumer process, and as Helle alluded to, the idea that you go and you vote every few years, this is just not enough to satiate the appetite for citizens who believe they have more choice and more voice in every aspect of their lives. They want to see it from their government too. And so so it's not just, I think, an obligation of government, it's also an opportunity. And so the governments that actually seize that opportunity are going to re-legitimize themselves, but also make better informed decisions. So I think it's a very exciting evolution, but not without its challenges. And so with that, I come to Eli. Eli gets to talk about one of the challenges. So Eli, sorry to call you a grandfather. I think I'm aging him before his time, but Eli really was, like, I think it was almost 10 years ago, he coined the term filter bubbles and saw something emerging in our information ecosystem that a lot of people hadn't seen yet. And actually it was years before they actually saw it. And Eli stayed on trying to understand that space and trying to improve it ever since. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about, as we talk about the citizens' participation and, getting people involved in the process, in a way we have to, I think it's really important that if we're going to engage people that way, that they do have access to really good, information. And you've talked a lot about what I guess the accountability of the platforms are, and maybe what the limitations of what the platforms can do, because the ecosystem goes far beyond just Facebook and Google, obviously. So talk a little bit about, I guess, as you hear about this, new engagement, citizens democracy, what are the things that concern you, and how do we overcome some of the impediments to ensuring that we have people who are well informed in order to be deeply engaged and be able to make good decisions?
Well, that's a lot, but I'll try to take it on. And thanks for the report. I think the report is so insightful and important. I think it's clear at this point that the public sphere that we have is failing us. And it's failing us because it's pulling us apart. It's failing us because it's stopping us from being able to have the kinds of conversations we need to be able to have in order to solve a problem like climate change. And it's really kind of tearing at our social fabric. And to me, a lot of what I've been working on at Civic Signals has been looking at why is that happening, and what are the templates that we have for thinking about solutions. And one of the metaphors that I've gotten increasingly focused on is the notion that it's useful to think about online space like cities. And the reason is that cities over the millennia have encountered a lot of the same challenges that digital platforms are now encountering. How do you coordinate behavior among strangers? How do you ensure that rapid growth doesn't overwhelm existing communities? There are so many pieces of the urban experience that really platforms in some ways are recapitulating. What's new, what's transformative, isn't just the scale, but it's that I think we're trying to do all of this in a container which is really not suited to housing all of our public discourse. And that's, we're trying to move our global public conversation into private companies that are, at the end of the day, accountable to shareholders for earnings growth. And that's not to say that that isn't a really powerful and important part of the ecosystem that we need to be thinking about if we're thinking about how we renew democracy. Absolutely. But I would submit to you that there's no example of a society that has managed to build successfully a thriving community using only private infrastructure. And the reason for that is that there are just some important tasks which are always going to be non-market tasks. We saw this with some of the recent revelations about Facebook just in the last couple of days, where one of the data scientists who was in charge of essentially adjudicating which countries' bot networks got taken down or which ones didn't, this was one person who was told literally by her supervisor, you're the dictator of most of the non-America's world when it comes to what kind of speech happens and what kind of speech doesn't happen. And I say that, again, not even as a ding on Facebook, as much as to say that this is what we are encountering when we try to put a whole bunch of public functions into a private company. It ends up on a list of prioritization for resources, and there's no accountability for that. And so if we use this urban metaphor, I think we really need to start thinking about how do we rebuild some of the public infrastructure that can serve a bunch of these non-market functions in digital space toward different ends and with different goals in mind. And those two things can be complementary, just like communities have bookstores and they have libraries. And both of those things have, serve people with books, but they have very different revenue models and missions. We need bookstores for the library, for the internet, but also libraries for the internet. And that's a place where there's been, I think, not enough sort of imaginative attention to what could be done here. I think that also actually, we have a template for this at scale. It's the relationship between Google and Wikipedia, which, here we have a private company essentially saying this complicated, important task of figuring out what the consensus truth is, that's actually better housed inside of a different kind of institution, a kind of institution that's governed differently and toward different ends. I think we need more entities along those lines. And so I guess where I come back to is, yes, we absolutely need a more participatory public conversation in order to revitalize democracy, but there's no way that we're going to get to the kind of conversation that we need in order to solve our big problems if we're trying to do it only through the narrow lens of companies that are constructed with a particular revenue focus in mind. And we need to broaden the aperture and think more creatively, as Karen Kornbluh and Emily Post were describing about, Emily Bell were describing about journalism. I think we need to think more broadly about how do we build this digital infrastructure that actually supports healthy relationships and conversations online.
I think that you've really nailed it in two dimensions. I mean, one is that we do rely, particularly in the United States, too much, I think, on the private sector to solve social problems. And one of the reasons why I personally believe that the COVID crisis has been managed so poorly is because we don't invest enough in public goods and public health. Obviously, that's not a mystery to anybody. But we rely so much on the private sector, and in certain kinds of challenges, it's not built for that. And so it's the system stupid. So the idea that something's going to happen on Facebook and somehow all the incentives are going to change and align for what's the public good, for dialogue and for deliberation and for supporting democracy, it's just not going to happen. So I think that's a fantastic point, Eli, and it is something that we perhaps, I think, again, going back to Sandro for a bit, the United States is not particularly good at this, and this is where all the innovation is happening. We need partners in thinking about platforms for public good and for public deliberation that have systems in place and a society who's more aligned with the idea of government engaging this way and creating systems that allow for this kind of deliberation. So, one of the things actually that's come up on the feed a couple of times is climate change. Climate change obviously is one of the big challenges. It's come up on the panel, and I'm getting some questions about it. Meta, I wanted to talk to you because the youth, I think the amount of engagement on this topic for youth and the amount that a youth movement is pushing this into the political dialogue in a new way and with a new pressure, it really is coming from young people. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your experience in engaging young people in deliberation. What are you finding is the sort of attitude and concerns of young people about democracy in general? And I guess how much of their engagement do you feel at this point is as a result of a concern for the big issues like climate change?
Firstly, thank you, Dawn, for your kind introduction, and also to the Recovery Summit for having me here today. I think this is a very interesting question that you asked, because too often there's this big sort of illusion that young people do not care about the issues that affect them, or they do not care about politics. And for us, what we see here when we work with young people here in UK, in Europe, and even some of the work that we've done in the US, is that of course young people do care about issues. So you mentioned climate change, and partly the reason why the conversation has shifted on climate change over the last year or two is because you've had inspirational activists like Greta Thunberg and lots of young activists from across the world. Of course, young people do care about whether they have a decent job that pays them basic respect or dignity. Of course, they care about whether they have a roof over their shoulders. The problem is whether they see traditional forms of politics or democracy as a vehicle to address the issues that they care about. And partly the reasons why they don't, and certainly in the case what we see here in the UK, is one is we're not educated about our democratic systems. So, the idea of being able to correlate how you make change by process to the issues that you care about, and we're not educated about how to go about doing that. So unless you come from a sort of a background which allows you to do that, or has given you that information, you have no idea in which you've never been educated in ways which you can make change. The second reason is representation. I mean, we're very lucky to be joined by Helle here, and there's not a lot of women in politics. When you look at the British Parliament, for example, I think it's getting better, only in this recent Parliament, but we're still talking very, very small numbers in sort of the bigger context of our population. When you look at the number of people from ethnic minority sort of backgrounds, and when you look at class system as well, it's even sort of less representative. So the issue is when you look at these institutions, you don't see people who look and sound like you, so you feel less comfortable, and there's automatically a barrier there. And the final reason why I think young people don't see traditional forms of democracy or politics as a vehicle to address them is the lack of trust between politicians and these agencies as well, and young people, because for time and time after again, they've been let down by politicians who look and sound the same, and who talk a lot in the run-up to elections, but then sometimes are not able to sort of make that change they want to do. And that's slightly related to education as well. And I say that because we're not educated about how our democracy works. Is sometimes, I mean, I was in Tunisia and I've done a lot of work there post the sort of Arab Spring revolution, and the expectation that young people had in Tunisia was right up there, straight after a revolution. But the reality of what politicians could actually deliver may not have met that. But because there's never been that level of education to actually what politicians can achieve in power, it's just this huge disconnect that takes place. So, I mean, in summary to your question, I think young people do care about issues. I think some of the issues around Brexit, I think Trump in the US, I think these are factors where they've politicized young people, and we're certainly seeing it in the UK and in Europe. And I think there's a growing intergenerational divide, which we certainly need to address very soon.
So, that's the point about education and needing to inform, how the process of how things change. I mean, that was really a big part of the report that we did was about how do you create a society that's capable of deliberation, particularly in a diverse context. I mean, we have to instill an entire new skill set around constructive dialogue and learning to disagree well, and learning to work together with people with different values than you have, and still solve problems together. It really is updating our civic architecture and our educational architecture to create a new kind of citizen. So it's encouraging to hear that there's actually an appetite for that among young people. I wanted to just go back briefly to the question of disinformation or misinformation. I mean, young people more than anybody, I think, get so much of their information online. Are you hearing a concern among young people about the amount of disinformation or whether they have access to quality information? Is there a high level of awareness of what this, I guess, of the problems in our digital ecosystem?
Certainly, and one of the things we are doing for My Life, I say actually in the UK, is we've started a new edition called the Quarantine Question Time, which is really about informing young people about the coronavirus pandemic, what it means for our economy, what it means for our jobs, what it means for our climate, and all the different aspects, because there's just so much uncertainty about it. But the key thing here is yes, there is concern about the information that is out there on social media. I think a lot of people don't know what to trust or what to believe, and you hear lots of news around, what's, Russia, for example, meddling with the US elections, what happened with Brexit here as well. And I think there's a lot of people who are quite skeptical about the sort of the information they see online. But I also think that's also true for mainstream media as well. A lot of young people are skeptical about the news that mainstream media put out because of their political biases as well. So I think there's a general wider conversation which will probably take us hours and days to sort of to unravel about media and social media and sort of the role it has on shaping sort of public opinion and sort of how much young people trust it. But I think young people probably equally don't trust the news that comes out of the main news as in comparison to what's coming out on what they see on social media.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Hele, can we turn back to you for a minute? Hele is the co-chair of the Facebook Oversight Board, which is a new evolution, and I think one meant to address the fact that Facebook is in a situation where they're damned if they do or they're damned if they don't. No matter what they do, basically, if they take down content or they don't, they're going to be condemned for either decision. And I believe that this was an evolution in their own thinking of how to govern this problem. And they brought in some amazing people like Hele. But there are clearly limitations, I think, embedded in the fact that they had to go out and create it in the first place. It might have been a better place for government to be the one to sort of impose a sort of, board like this in a way that would be seen as really objective to the situation. I think it's gotten a lot of criticism as a result of the fact that Facebook was the one who prompted it. But I wanted to give you an opportunity, Hele, to talk a little bit about, I guess, what's the potential and the limitations of that board in its work, and how, and how, I guess, beyond a board like this, do we hold platforms like Facebook accountable for information on critical issues like climate change, to providing really good information?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have long, but I'll try to talk a little bit about what it is. I mean, the oversight board was created by Facebook in the spring. We are still not up and running, but our task is basically to take the decisions that Facebook has taken until now about what content stays up on the platforms, Instagram and Facebook, and what content gets removed. And what we are basically there is to change the way things are now, because right now it is basically up to Facebook itself to take these decisions, and ultimately Mark Zuckerberg, who actually takes some of these decisions. And in the future, there will be more transparency about how these decisions are taken. We are an oversight board where users can appeal to us if they're unhappy with the decisions Facebook has taken. And Facebook has said very clearly that they will follow our decisions, and of course that we are completely independent. It will never be my job to defend Facebook or talk not about regulation, but I do think that it is worthwhile trying this initiative, because we have to find a way of balancing the freedom of speech that social media has given so many people across the world with other human rights. And that is the cross point that Facebook is trying to find every day in their content policies, but they shouldn't do it alone. And now what they're trying to do is socialize that decision. In my ideal world, this should not be done by a private company. This is something that, I come from Northern Europe. This is something that I would be hoping that big multilateral organizations like the UN could be doing. Why doesn't UN have a body that could be the last appeal for users using all social media? That would be the ideal. Unfortunately, I don't think that is within a realistic reach right now. So for me, this is the second best, that Facebook has finally realized that they shouldn't be both the decision maker on content and also be the last place of appeal. And now they have formed this body which will take binding decisions. We are independent and we are different from Facebook. And of course, none of us would have signed up for this if we haven't been given this independence. So hopefully I'm open for questions as well, because this is of course extremely controversial. I have decided that it's better to do something than do nothing. And that is why I am co-chair of this oversight board.
Well, I think you're incredibly courageous to take it on. It's a very, very big task. As somebody who's, sitting here, a few, I guess, frankly, we're weeks and days away from what I think is the biggest election of my lifetime. Although I have to say, I think every election almost feels like that for some reason. But given, we're in the midst of a COVID crisis, and we're facing just this. Seems like existential threats on so many sides. One of the things I was hoping was that the work of this committee would get underway more quickly before the election. And I'm wondering why is the board delayed in getting started?
We're actually not delayed. We were always going to start in the autumn. Of course, it's been really difficult when we can't meet and everything has to be done like this. But we always thought that we always knew that it would be very hard to set up a new system. What you have to think of is this is almost like a new.
What happened?
New court system for Facebook, where we have to do this. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
yes.
So I lost you. I thought I lost you. Where we have to get mechanisms for seeing all this content, where we have to get the user appeal system. There's so many mechanical things around what we're doing that we have to get in place. So we are not delayed. We will start in October. We would have liked to start earlier, but it's very hard to get it in place under these circumstances. What I'm hoping is that we will be up and running for the election, but particularly maybe after the election, where there could be content being put on social media, which is extremely controversial, and perhaps we will be part of those decisions. But of course, it would have been great if we were up and running a year ago, but that's not how the world has functioned.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I know we're coming to an end, and I know the moderators are going to come in and shut me off at any moment. So we've got 2 minutes left, but I wanted to thank obviously the panel and the pitches. I think that the crisis and the challenges we have of democracy are obviously way bigger than we can handle in a 35-minute panel. But I think that everybody on here is working in different ways to try to improve our democracy and make it better, including myself. The conversation that we've had today was hopefully to present a set of ideas, not to solve all the problems. And as I said, I'd urge everybody to go and download the document. It is really put forward there as a set of ideas that should be considered, and a direction for democracy that will, I believe, re-legitimize the system and make it more capable and competent in a very diverse and increasingly sort of confusing world. I think, as Sandro indicated, you have to have very high levels of transparency in these processes in order for them to be trusted and in order for them to be capable of holding our decision makers to account. But this is the direction forward in a society that has evolved to a place where it wants more voice and choice, and that's not going That's not going away. That's always been the trajectory of democracy, and this is the next evolution of it. And it's one that technology makes possible, which we have to, take the good with the bad, manage the consequences, and harness the opportunities. So I want to thank everybody here today, the panelists, and all the people who contributed to the pitches. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon and continuing this conversation. Thank you so much for being with us, everybody.
Thank you, Dawn,
Thank you.
keeping us together.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Dawn, a very quick but meaningful thank you to you as a fantastic moderator of that session. We really appreciate you. Hella, thank you so much for being our excellent co-chair for this session as well. And to all our panelists, I just want to echo on behalf of the Recovery Project partners, thank you for spending some time with us today. To our viewers watching, this concludes the end of day 3. Tomorrow, day 4, is our final day of the Recovery Summit. It's hard to believe that it's already here. The Recovery Project team are going to be collecting some of our partners together. We've got some interesting public polling and data insights that we're going to be sharing with people tomorrow. And so I encourage you to tune in at 10 a.m. Eastern for us, a panel conversation about how we take some of the bold ideas that we've discussed throughout the summit, including many from this Democracy and Institutions panel that were really fantastic and compelling, and how we actually move to implementation. So I encourage you to tune back in tomorrow at 10 a.m. And I want to thank you all for tuning in. So we'll see you again tomorrow here on the Recovery Summit for day 4.
Thank you.